Dr. Sandra Sigauke. I'm a veterinarian from the University of Zimbabwe. So I'm going to be talking about livestock production, not all the animals that we can keep, but the major ones. So I'm going to be talking about cattle and goats, and then maybe other things are going to come in. So first things first, well, what is it that why are we going to be rearing livestock? Say tichida kuchengeta mombe nembudzi nehwai netsuro nehuku nenguruve maybe. The reason, the big idea is for us to make money. So if we want to make money, we need a plan. So the first thing that we need if we're going to have good production is a plan. What do we want to do? What do we have? Why do we want to do what we want to do? And what are we hoping to achieve? So the requirements for any establishment for livestock, the first thing that, like the major thing that you need is land. You need land. So if you have land, you want to see how big your land is and what you can do with it. Obviously, you can't keep mombe kuseri kwemba like in your backyard, and you also can't use 500 hectares to rear huku chete unless you want it to be a massive project. So you need to look at your land. What kind of land do you have and what can you get from there? And then the next thing that you need is capital. Most people just start doing things because others are doing them. We all know that time when wakachengeta zvihuta because everybody was doing it. So now there's this whole road runner thing that is going around. Saka, when we are taking care of, when we're planning to have a livestock establishment, we need capital. Not simply because everybody's doing it, but we need the money to invest in the project. You can't start a project. Even the Bible says that what man is going to start building a building and then without first looking at what he has, and then stops in the middle, and then everybody's going to call that man a fool. So we don't want people to think that we are fools. We need a plan. So the plan is we need to know the land that we have. We need to know the investment that we're going to put in it. And we also need manpower. Here's what I mean. You can't start taking care of a herd of 500 cattle without people to help you do it. So you need manpower. And when you need manpower, you don't just get people to do things for you for free. It's also an investment. So you need a proper plan on how you're going to be taking care of those people, how you're going to be paying them back, and how you plan on maintaining good relations with them. So those are the major requirements. The other thing that you need when you're going to start a livestock production enterprise is documentation. Everything has to be legal. You can't do illegal dealings. So you need records for every procedure and every occurrence, everything that you do, because record keeping forms the basis of everything that you do on a farm. If you're going to be taking care of your cattle, you need to know how many cattle you have. You need to know when you got them. You need to know when they were born. You need to identify them even. They need to have numbers or names or whichever method you decide to use. You also need to have all that documented. You need to have an inventory of all your equipment. You can't be buying, let's say for example, you can't be buying tractors every day. So you need to know what equipment you have, how you're going to use it, who's been handling it. So you need an inventory for that. You also need proper bookkeeping. You can't be spending money not knowing kuti Marianda Shansapa, Yakawanda say, Ishoma say. You need to know. That's how you can put into perspective your profit and loss. And you also need proper procurement structures. So for livestock production, you need to know when you're going to buy your feed, how many bags of feed you need, when you're going to need a veterinary visit, when you're going to need all the things that you're going to use. So you need to properly plan. You can't wait for kuti feed ipere so that you go and buy another bag And you can't be buying bags of feed every day. Let's suppose you're taking care of chickens. You need to know, for these 100 birds under Torah, how many bags of 100 birds under Torah, how many bags of feed am I going to need until they get to 6 weeks? And when am I going to buy the first batch of feed? And when am I going to buy the second one? When am I going to buy the finisher? That is going to help you. So you need documentation of all those things. And then the other important thing when you want to start a livestock establishment is housing. You need to be sure what kind of housing you're going to use. Let's suppose unoda kuchengeta mbudzi. Auchengeteri mbudzi mkitchen. So you need to know kuti mbudzi dzandiri kuda, how many are they? What kind of housing do I want for them? Let's suppose unoda kuchengeta nguruve. You can't be keeping them mune a slippery floor because they're going to fall and break their limbs. They're not going to be able to reproduce because of that. You can't say kuda kuchengeta huku and then wakudzichengetera pasina bedding iri enough or pasina pane mhepo yakawandisa and things like that. So you need proper housing. So housing is the first thing that you should purchase when you decide to do livestock rearing. Saka kana uchida kuchengeta mombe, tanga watovaka danga rako before watora mombe dzacho. Kana uchida kuita feedlot, tanga wagadzira feedlot yacho nemafeeding trough nezvese zvinodiwa before you get the cattle. You need to also look at the kind of material you're going to use for the housing. You need good quality, durable material. Vanhu vakawanda, they like shortcuts. So we like to get things that are cheaper, or we want to get more for less. And when we compromise on those things, we're also compromising on the quality of what we're going to get. And like I said, you can't be keeping nonzani nguruve mune matiles anotsvedza. You want your housing to be comfortable and practical. So housing is the largest initial investment. So since it's the largest initial investment, you might want to start with temporary. Come on. You might want to start with temporary structures while you look at putting in something that is more permanent. So as your project is growing, that's when you start moving from the temporary things to the more permanent one. But even if it's temporary, it still has to be good quality and durable. And then the other important thing, regardless of which livestock you're taking care of, is feed. Because we often say that we are what we eat. Even our cattle and our goats and our sheep are also what they eat. So we need good quality feed because it's essential for health and production. Since we said our goal is to get money when we're keeping livestock, we want the money that we put in to come back to us fourfold or 100-fold. So we need to invest in good quality feed. It's probably the largest ticket item when you're doing livestock production. So what you need is proper plans, like I said, with regards to feed. You need to know what kind of feed you're going to be. You need to know what kind of system, I'm going to talk about it later. You need to know what kind of system you're going to be using, and you also need to know where and when you're going to be getting the feed. The prices of feed and the type of feed are also influenced by location and scale. So if you're taking care of a lot of cattle, then you may want to move away from feeding them from your pocket, and you may want to move to feeding them from like what we call free grazing, because you won't be able to sustain. So that's what we mean by scale. So you need to know how many animals you're going to feed, and also your location may determine the price of the feed. That's important to note. And this feed needs proper storage, because if you don't store the feed properly, you're going to have problems with mold, and that will cause diseases in your animals as well. So you need to be careful before you buy the feed. That's why I was talking about housing and infrastructure. You need to have a proper plan. You need to know where you're going to be storing the feed. And then when you plan on buying feed, you also need to plan on manure handling. How are you going to be removing the manure? What are you going to be using it for? How are you going to be handling it? If it's free grazing, then it's fine. They're just going to drop their manure in the field. But if it's intensive rearing, then you need to know what you're going to do with the manure. You need a plan for it, because you can't be keeping your animals in a dirty place. Also, still on the general stuff, you also need expert advice. So On the list of experts that you need advice from, the first one is your neighbor. Why? Because most people don't believe in asking other people for help, but this is very important because when you talk to your neighbors, that's when you know where to get the cheap stuff. That's when you know what happens in that area. Let's suppose you're new in an area, you need to know how the climate is, where do they get water, what happens when the electricity is cut. You need all that. So you need to have good relations with your neighbor. You also need to have good relations with your neighbor because you don't know what kind of trouble you're going to get into. You know how animals can behave sometimes. Your goats would find a way to escape from your farm to the next one and then cause trouble. So you need to be good friends with your neighbors. You also need to know healthcare workers who can help you. You need insurance. You need to know a good transporter, a reliable one. You need security. And above everything, you need a veterinarian. So this is the part where I come in, and that's why I'm here today. So we're done with the general stuff. Now I'm going to start talking about beef production. So for beef production, you need to know what production system you're going to use. Is it going to be intensive or is it going to be extensive? Let me explain. Intensive means there's zero grazing. So you're taking care of your animals in a barn, for example, and you're feeding them from the pocket. What I mean by feeding them from the pocket is all the feed that they're getting, you're buying it from the store. So they're feeding concentrates. So this is the kind of production that people do with feedlots. So if you're going to be the farmer who takes calves from other farmers, let's suppose you want to go into beef production, but you're getting your calves from dairy producers, the bull calves that come from dairy producers, and you feed them, and then you sell them, then you're going to want to do intensive zero grazing. You're keeping them in one place and you're feeding them so that once they are fed, they go to the market. And then with extensive, that's where you do the grazing. They're free range. They just graze, and then when you decide to sell a cow, you just sell it. And then there's what we call semi-intensive, which I think is what most farmers in Zimbabwe do. The semi-intensive is where they also go for grazing in the field, and then you also feed them from the pocket. So you want to decide on that if you're going to go into beef production. And if you're doing dairy, you also need to decide whether they're going to be semi-intensive, intensive or extensive. But most of the time, for dairy producers, semi-intensive is what makes sense because, or intensive is what makes sense because you need your cows to be close by, and you don't need them to stress like looking for forage. And then once you decide on the production system, you also need to decide on the breed and the breeding system you're going to be using. So there are beef breeds that are common in Zimbabwe, your Brahmans, your Mashona, and all the other beef breeds, the Beef Master, Limousine and all that. And then we have dairy breeds. For the dairy breeds in Zimbabwe, we have Holstein, the black and white cows. We have Jersey, and the Angus and all that. So what you need to decide is which breed suits what you're going to do the most. If you're going to be breeding for beef, then you're going to choose a cow that grows faster and builds muscle faster. But if you're going to be breeding for dairy, you're going to choose a cow that's going to give you good quality milk and in large quantities. So it depends on why you're breeding. So you need the information. This is why you need your neighbor and your veterinarian as well, because you're going to need that information to help you choose which one suits your needs. So we come to the breeding system. You're going to choose which breeding system makes more sense for your purposes. So is it going to be natural breeding or is it going to be AI, artificial insemination? Artificial insemination makes more sense for beef cattle because you're going to synchronize them all at once. You're going to inseminate them so that they all come on heat at once, and then you're going to inseminate them at once. And when you get your calves, you're going to get your calves all at the same time or within the same time frame. So that is important because it's going to help you have the same age of cattle to manage at every stage. And that helps for production because you're going to know that when we take this batch to the market, we still have another replacement stock that is coming in to replace that age that we have taken to the market. And then if you're doing for dairy, you can still do AI. The most important reason why we do artificial insemination in dairy is because we want the bulls that have genes for good quality milk and for high yield. So you're going to choose artificial insemination for dairy for that reason. And it's also safer because it cuts on all the diseases that might come with natural breeding. With natural breeding, you also need to be wary of inbreeding. That is very important because then if you have inbreeding, then you're not going to have good quality cattle in your head because the same genes keep circulating in the same crow. I've noticed that most farmers in Zimbabwe don't really mind. Most small-scale farmers don't really mind about the whole inbreeding thing. They're just like, this is my bull, this is the best bull. So they don't really care about how many generations of the same genes are circulating because this same bull is going to have a calf by this cow, and then that calf is going to become a cow and is going to be inseminated by the same bull, and we're going to have the same gene pool. And in the end, we don't have good quality products. And when we talk about breeding, we also need to know the calving interval for our cows. The goal is to have a calf per cow per year. So zvatiri kuda ndezvekuti mombe dzedu imwe naimwe iri mudanga iite mhuru 1 pagore. Saka izvozvo tinozviridyusa nei nekumeka sure kuti mombe dzedu we breed them per time iri specific and we also feed them for reproduction. Sometimes we feed but we don't really mind what's happening. Chinongokosha kwatiri ndechekuti tava nemhuru, but yazouya rini. Sometimes we keep a cow in our head for 4 years isina beta mhuru, just hoping that maybe one day. But that's not good for production, which is something that we need to talk about because most of the time we just keep these animals for the sake of keeping them because ndine mombe 13, ndine mombe 15. But like we said when we began this presentation, our goal is to get money from production. So if it's not bringing us money, then why are we keeping it? And then from there, I spoke about how feeding is important for breeding. So I'm going to talk about feed and feeding. What is important for cattle when you're feeding is roughage. So you need to have good roughage. So roughage comes from silage, hay, and the grazing that they do. So if you feel like you don't have enough grazing, then you need to supplement with hay. And because that is also not enough, you also need to supplement. Some farmers in the semi-intensive, they mix their hay with concentrates so that they boost the nutrition of the animal. That is important as well. And also you need to supplement with salt blocks and molasses. Most farmers don't care about salt blocks because they think it's not important, but it is important because there are some minerals and microelements that these animals may not be getting from the forage. So it helps them to get the supplements, the minerals and the micro elements and the vitamins. So that is important as well to supplement. It's not an everyday thing, but it is important. And also when it comes to feeding, you need you need a veterinarian to help you with the body condition scoring. What we mean by body condition scoring is how fat or the fat cover on your animal. This is important for beef producers because it's also part of how your meat is going to be graded when you sell it at the abattoir. And also, it is important because it also helps with reproduction. So you need your animals not to be overweight, but also not to be underweight so that they can reproduce. And then the feeding systems, we have what we call a total mixed ration, which is when you give the animals everything. This is what happens with feedlots and zero grazing. You give them everything. It's a total mixed ration. You have the roughages, you have the concentrate, and you have the micro elements. You give it all at once, and you know what you're giving in what proportions. And then we have the unmixed ration. This is semi-intensive. This is where you get your hay, and then you mix it with the concentrate from these suppliers, and then you feed your cattle. And then you have free range. Free range is when you just leave them to graze on their own. So you also need to decide what feeding system am I going to use or is suitable for my purposes. And then for herd health depends on things like vaccination, deeping, deworming, mastitis management, dehorning, castration, and all those things. And these are dependent also on the facilities at the farm. What you need at a farm is not supposed to be fancy, but it's just a race where you can restrain your cattle and do what you want to do. You also need loading ramps when you want to sell them. You need feed troughs, you need pens for the cattle, and you need like the housing, as I was talking about. So these facilities are important. And when you're doing the herd health management, you need to know when and how to do it. So I'm going to talk briefly about deeping, deworming, and vaccination of cattle. So in Zimbabwe, I think most of you have heard about January disease. It's been a problem since 5 years ago or so. Let's just say the past 10 years, we've been having problems with January disease. And it seems now it's spreading even more. In 2019, people in Wedza, Sadza, Chivu lost their cattle. I know of a number of herds that were completely eradicated by January disease. So it is important for us to know what causes these things and how to manage them. So we have tick-borne diseases. January disease is one of them. We also have anaplasmosis, inonzinyongo, and we also have ehrlichiosis kanota heartwater. So it is important for farmers to know these things are caused by ticks. Ticks carry these parasites. And these parasites, once a tick bites on your cattle and it feeds, it's going to leave that parasite in the blood. And because the parasite is in the blood, it spreads faster, and that is what kills your animal. So the most important thing in dealing with these tick-borne diseases is dealing with the tick, because that is what is causing our problem. So what we need to do to deal with the tick is to deep our cattle. Most farmers believe in shortcuts, like I said. So shortcuts don't work when it comes to this, because in the end you're going to lose all your investment because of one tiny little tick. So deeping is important. In Zimbabwe, because we have this problem with tick-borne diseases, we need to have what we call intensive deeping. So that means that when it's the rainy season, we deep our cattle once every week. In some farms, in some commercial farms, I know that they dip them twice every week because they know the importance of not dipping and the impact of it. So it's important to dip them once every week in the rainy season and once every fortnight during the rest of the year. And also, we need to manage our pastures and how we take care of our pastures, because that's where the ticks come from. So it is important to dip your cattle once every week during the rainy season and twice every fortnight. I really can't say which chemicals to use, but the recommendation is that we rotate our chemicals. So if you're using a plunge dip, don't dip barrier, you need to change the water after every 500 cattle. So kana mune mombe 10 nedhibha renyu makadzidhibhisa ka 50 ndofunga kuti gore rese ratopera moita sei mobvisa mvura mochinja mushonga. Then mishonga yacho yamunenge muchishandisa hazvinake kuramba muchishandisa one mushonga kusvikira mheno. You need to keep changing, because if we keep using the same chemical, same dipping chemical, then the parasites are going to develop resistance. And once they're resistant to that chemical, then they're going to be a problem to eliminate. So it is important to keep changing the chemicals every now and again. The other thing about dipping is if you're using a plunge dip, that is most effective. If you're using a spray race, then you need to make sure that the cow is completely soaked when it comes out on the other end. So you need to make sure that your dilutions are proper according to the manufacturer's instructions, and you also make sure that the cow is soaked when it comes out. Also, you can use other auxiliary methods for tick control, like tick grease and the pour-ons, and that is important as well to help you in tick control. And then the next thing that we need with head health is deworming. So deworming is kuya kwatinoti kudoza. Kudoza mombe kuri important because the worms that are inside the gut are sharing the cow's food, they're sharing the cattle's food. So iyo iri kudya, but it's also sharing, so it doesn't gain weight and it keeps losing condition to a point where it's debilitated and it won't recover. So it is important. Dzimwe mombe unozoona dzaita kunge dzine mvura pachirebvu, dzimwe dzakazvimba matumbu because of that. So zvakakosha kuti tidose mombe dzedu. Also, I won't recommend which chemicals to use, but it is important to keep changing them every now and again to manage the worms. So when do we deworm our cattle? Deworming should be done just before the cold season, around May in Zimbabwe. Why? Because these parasites, they have a mechanism of surviving over winter, which we call overwintering. They have a mechanism of surviving the cold conditions. So they make sure that they get into the animal before winter, and then they just relax inside the animal before winter. And then when it's summer now, when it starts to get hot, they come out and then they spread. So it is important. They have their mechanisms, I won't get into that. So it is important to deworm just before winter, around May, and also just before the rainy season. That's when we start to get into the hot season. We need to deworm, that's around September. So we said deworming should be done in May and in September. And the chemicals, you choose which one you want to use and which one suits your purposes. And also you need to be careful with these dewormers because some of them cause spontaneous abortions. So you need to ask the manufacturer and the shop where you're getting it, which is why we recommend that you get all your chemicals from reputed shops, because that's where the experienced people are. That's where people who are trained to do these things are, and they're going to explain to you what you need to buy and why you need to buy it. And then with vaccinations, for cattle, there are a lot of vaccinations that are important, but I'm just going to mention a few. Vaccination should be done around 6 months for most cattle, and for heifers, it's important to vaccinate against brucellosis, which causes abortions later in life. So it is important to vaccinate them. So the vaccination should be done between 3 and 8 months. That's when you should vaccinate against brucellosis. And then there are other vaccinations that should be done yearly, like lumpy skin disease, blackleg, anthrax, 3 days, stiffness, sickness, and Rift Valley fever. These you should do every year for all your cattle because these diseases just keep making rounds. For instance, lumpy skin. This year we've had a problem with people complaining about their cattle getting lumpy skin. So it is important to vaccinate before they get it. That is very important. And the vaccination program for most cattle in Zimbabwe is the winter vaccination. Winter vaccination is important because when you vaccinate in winter, then you're going to give the cattle's body time to produce immunity so that when we get to the wet season where most of these viruses are circulating, where most of these diseases are actually caused by insects, and most of these flies are plenty during the rainy season. So if you vaccinate in winter, the body gets time to mount an immunity against the viruses before we get to the wet season. And now I'm going to talk a bit about about goats, and then we call it a day. So when it comes to goats, the whole general thing that I was talking about before I started talking about cattle applies to goats as well. What is most important in goats is for you to determine as well, what breed do you want? Do you want to breed for meat, or do you want to breed dairy goats? So we have a number of goat breeds. In Zimbabwe lately, people have been going crazy about the boer goat, which is bred for meat. But we also have other breeds that are bred for meat. We have the Mashona, the Matebele, because they reproduce faster. And we also have dairy goats like the Sanin, which I think is an industry that people haven't really looked into, but it's actually quite lucrative for you to be doing dairy goats, sorry. So when we're breeding goats, we also want to know why we're breeding them. And the breeding, those mostly, that's the female goat, they breed at 12 months. That's when we start mating them. And the male ones, it's a little earlier. So it is important to separate the two, because puberty in goats is mostly, like, they reach puberty because of the influence of the male. So, or they even go on heat because of the influence of the male. So it is important to separate them before you want to breed them, because if you keep the male close to the female ones, then they're just going to start breeding before they are ready. So it is earlier, and that's not a good thing. So it is important to separate them before they get to the age of 12 months for the females. And then you also need to be sure which male goats you want to breed, so that you castrate all the other males that are not going to be breeding, to avoid crossbreeding that you wouldn't want. And their breeding systems for goats is either you want a crossbreed or a purebred. The purebred goats are the pedigrees, the boars that are coming from South Africa at a cost of around $800 or something like that. So it is important as well to determine which breeding system you want to use. Do you want to go crossbreed, or do you want to have purebreds? If you want to have purebreds, then your investment is going to be higher. And if you want to have crossbreeds, your investment is going to be high, but it's not going to be as high as purebreds, because you're going to need a pedigree male and a pedigree female for you to get a purebred. But for the crossbreeds, you can also get pedigrees, but it's not as important. And then for the mating systems, you also need to determine what mating system you're going to use. By mating system, I mean, how are these goats going to reproduce? So is it going to be random? Are you just going to leave the females with the male and then they breed randomly? Or are you going to select them to use what we call assortative breeding, where you actually determine that this female is supposed to mate with this male so that I get the genes from there? And then now I'm going to talk about the breeding calendar. So you need to select your breeding stock. So that's which breeds do you want to mate, which goats do you want to mate, I mean. And then that's the first month. And then the second month, you put the buck in with the females so that they start the breeding. That's when the mating happens. In the third month, that's when the mating ends. Fourth and fifth month, they're separated. Then they're separated because you don't want them to keep mixing. And then in the sixth month, you separate the pregnant ones from the ones that are not pregnant. And then you supplement and vaccinate in the seventh month, you separate and vaccinate. I'm going to make a table for this so that it's clearer. In the seventh month, you vaccinate and supplement vitamins for the pregnant ones. So you vaccinate against pulpy kidney disease, and also if it's sheep, you also vaccinate for, what I'm saying about goats also applies to sheep. So you vaccinate against pulpy kidney and also against blue tongue if it's in sheep, all the pregnant ones. And then in the eighth month, the kidding starts. That's when the goats start to give kids. So now I'm going to talk about care for kids, how you take care of the kids. So when they're born in the 10th month, then you vaccinate them at 1 month against pulpy kidney as well. So caring for kids, what you need to do is to prepare for how to take care of your kids. So you need to clean the area where they're going to have their kids. You need to make sure that the door is kept in the kidding area a few days before she gives birth. And you also need to when the kids are born, you need to separate the pregnant doors from the rest of the flock so that the birth process is not disturbed. And that also helps to create a good bond between the doe and the kid. So you don't need to intervene in the birthing process unless it's really serious, but you don't need to. So the housing for the kids, it should be warm and comfortable. And then when you're feeding the kids, you should allow them to suckle so that they get colostrum. You should also do the same for the cows. You should allow them to suckle so that they get colostrum. And that is most effective during the first 6 hours of birth. And then if I've had farmers who complain with problems about their kids not feeding or the doe refusing to nurse the kid, you need to foster them. So you get milk from other kids and you give them. You also get colostrum from other kids and you give them so that they don't die. And then at about 6 weeks, they start nibbling around and on grass and leaves. That's when you should allow them to graze. From no later than 1 month, they should be allowed to graze. And then they start to effectively graze at around 6 to 7 weeks. So you also need identification, like I said. You need ear tagging, or you need to give them names so that you know which one is doing what for your record keeping. And then you also need to take care of them. I've had farmers complain about their kids having diarrhea. This is because sometimes the water that we provide is not clean. So you need to get them antibiotics if that happens, antibiotics that help against coccidiosis in goats. So if you go to vet suppliers, they will tell you which ones are effective against coccidiosis in goats. And you need to keep the pens clean. That also contributes to this coccidiosis problem. And then you need to protect them from predators. That is very important. And then at weaning, they're approximately weaned at around 100 days. And weaning should be done when they're around 8 to 12 kgs in weight. That helps them to thrive as adults. And then you also need to vaccinate. Castration is also important for the bucks that are not going to be breeding. It's also done when they are weaned at around 100 days. That's when you castrate. So there are different methods of castrating, but it is important for you to castrate the bucks that are not going to be breeding. And then for nutrition, the nutrition for goats is the same as for cattle because they are all ruminants, and also for sheep. So it is important for you to feed them roughage, to supplement, and to give them concentrates. So it depends on which rearing system you're going to use. But most goat farmers decide on going the semi-intensive way, which is budget-friendly and also highly effective. So when it comes to, we don't dehorn goats. And when it comes to deworming and dipping, what is important to note is that we deworm after we vaccinate against pulpy kidney. So we said that we vaccinate against pulpy kidney when they are pregnant. When we discover that they're pregnant, like in the 3rd month, that's when we vaccinate against pulpy kidney. So once we vaccinate against pulpy kidney, 2 weeks later we vaccinate. 2 weeks later we deworm. So vaccinate and then deworm 2 weeks later against pulpy kidney. And then also when we wean them, we vaccinate against pulpy kidney, and then we deworm after 2 weeks. That is also important. Those are the important vaccines for goats. And then when it comes to marketing and market grading, this depends on the country, but most of the time, marketing or market grading is done based on the grade and the weight of the animal that you want to sell, of the carcass that you're selling. So meat is graded based on carcass maturity, the age of the animal that you slaughtered. It's also based on fat cover. So like I said, there are portions of the meat that need to have fat, and then there are portions of it that don't need to have fat. So you need to manage your body condition scoring very, very well. That is where you need a veterinarian. And then also meat is graded on the weight, dentition, that means the number of teeth in the mouth of the animal, and then carcass bruising, that means the amount of care that was taken before slaughter and during slaughter, and also bone ossification, like the amount of bone inside the bones, that is important as well in meat grading. So in conclusion, livestock producers, they're entrepreneurs and they're supposed to produce for the market. So we should be determined and creative. And we should always be looking for ways to develop ourselves and to make our product better, how to market it and how to improve on our product so that we reach the market demands. We need to have proper managerial skills, like I said in the beginning. We need to have a proper plan, and we need to be sure what we want to do and how we intend to do it. We also need to have access to finance and labor, land and knowledge. That is very, very useful. So it is important for us to know what we want to do before we jump right into it. So if you have any questions, I'm sure my number is going to be provided, but yeah, thank you.